Welcome to Legal Candy, where we are going to unwrap the sweet secrets of law. I'm your host, attorney Candace Colucci with the Colucci Law Group, and we are here today and we have got MK in the studio. Say hello. Hello. So MK, you know, is our content writer and producer of the show, and we have got a very tantalizing show today. Since we had just recently did O.J. Simpson, it has sparked us to kind of reopen some of those just kind of crimes of the century and cases. And so that brought us to a case that is very near and dear to my heart, which is the Casey Anthony trial regarding the death of her daughter, Caylee Anthony. So that ended up being another one of those huge monumental trials where everybody in the world kind of stopped what they were doing and watching it and had their own personal opinion about what took place.
Right in our backyard, too.
Right in our backyard. So the entire situation took place in Orlando, around the Orlando area. So, and we are not very far from that. If you remember kind of some of the just main details, Casey Anthony was a young mother and she was charged in 2008 with the murder of her 2-year-old daughter, Caylee Anthony. The case captured national attention due to the mysterious circumstances surrounding Caylee's disappearance and the subsequent discovery of her remains near the Anthony family home, as well as Casey's conflicting statements and behaviors during the investigation. If you recall, as I recall very clearly, Casey Anthony was found not guilty. So we are going to take the time today to kind of go through the facts that took place in that case and what happened during the trial to kind of explain some of the things that left people to kind of wondering what could have possibly happened. And when we talked about O.J. Simpson, when we talked about the verdict in O.J. Simpson, how it was polarizing, right? That there was really people that stood and were like, they believed he was innocent, and there are people who believed that he was guilty. But I do not remember during the Casey Anthony trial of anybody saying she didn't do it. Like, I don't remember, everybody was talking about it, and I don't remember a single person actually saying, it wasn't even a debate. I think people were more shocked that this woman was even going to trial. I mean, they were just like, there was no doubt in anyone's mind by the time the trial was about to begin that Casey Anthony was guilty of this crime. And I was literally going back through my Facebook because I remember not too long ago I had one of those memories came up, and it came up from around this time. I had posted a photo, and I'm not really big about posting things, so I had posted a photo of Caylee Anthony, and I had wrote this entire thing about her because it was so And I remember now we've listened to it and I've heard a bunch of specials about it. What they said was that everybody took a personal connection to this little girl. And I think everybody wanted justice for her. And I believe I was one of those people. I was one of those people that just saw this little girl. And she was around the same age of my niece at the time, and I just remember what that 2-year-old vulnerability that when they're 2, they're just so loving and cuddling and hilarious, and the world is just so bright to them, and
they
to
love
think,
their mothers.
love their mothers, love their grandparents, and I remember just feeling that exact same thing that people talk about, is that connection to the story of how could this happen to something so beautiful and precious, and with no answers at that point in time. So we will do our legal disclaimer to make sure that we have made it very clear to everybody that the content shared on Legal Candy is for informational purposes only. It should not be taken as legal advice. This podcast does not establish an attorney-client privilege or the radio show. If you're listening on the radio show, all the information is gathered from public sources, and sometimes when you're looking on the internet, it just may not be factual. So please do your own research. If you question anything that you hear here, and if you have any questions and need legal advice, please reach out to our office at Colucci Law Group, 727-733-9438. And if we can't help you, we will point you in the right direction of somebody that definitely can. So let's get into the nitty-gritty facts of Casey Anthony. So I just remember that with Casey Anthony, I I didn't know if I had so much hatred for anybody else in my life than this woman. And I think that's how so many people felt. And we're going to go through the timeline of where that hate came from for most people. And it came from the sheer fact that her daughter goes missing and she doesn't seem to care for 31 days until her mother is the one who brings it up. And she has no remorse for it, no nothing. She lacks emotion. She continues to lie over and over again while the world starts searching for her child. So let's bring us to the beginning of our timeline. So we've got we're looking at the beginning of June. So June 9th, June 15th, 2008. So that is supposedly the last time that Kaylee Anthony is seen alive with her mom, Casey. So what we know is that Casey Anthony is young. She's 20-something. I guess I don't remember exactly the age she was. She's 20-something. She had a child young, and she's got two parents, George and Cindy, who become pivotal in this whole entire thing. George and Cindy Anthony. George Anthony is a retired detective, okay? Retired detective for me ends up playing a huge role for me in why I believe it wasn't reasonable at all to think that he was involved in this. It was such not a good crime that I'm like, if he's a detective after all these years, it's the last thing I'm thinking is that his motive is to try to hide a body a couple blocks from the house on the side of the road. So I definitely think that was huge that he was a retired detective. And then I think you said that Cindy was a nurse.
Yes.
Okay. So she's a nurse, and they have two children. They have got Casey, and then they have Lee. And then Casey has a daughter, Kaylee, early on, and she's a young mother. So it's very understandable that as a young mother, her parents, which are their grandparents, are very involved in the life. And by all accounts, as you see pictures and stories, is that they're extremely loving and supportive and spend a lot of time with Kaylee. They're always willing to watch her whenever her mother, which is Casey, who's young and likes to party and is hanging out in Orlando, likes to do. So what takes place is that we've got in June of 2008, there's a last time that the family sees Kaylee Anthony, and she's with her mom. And so they think it's around June 16 is probably the last day that anybody sees actually Kaylee alive. And so time kind of goes on, and what you find out is that the mother, Cindy, has been asking questions of the daughter, right? Has been like, hey, where's Kaylee? I'd like to see Kaylee, bring her over. And all you have is Casey making up all these excuses. She's like, oh, she's with a babysitter. Oh, the babysitter. We hear this babysitter. She talks about all the time. And she's kind of like ignoring her parents for a little while. And then what becomes like the very first trigger in this case is that on June 27th, 2008, Casey Anthony's car, a Pontiac Sunbird, is abandoned in a parking lot in an Amscot, and then the car is impounded around June 30th. And it isn't until actually July 15th is when the George and Cindy, which are Casey's parents, they are notified that this car has now been impounded. So Casey has just abandoned this vehicle, and now the car gets towed, and now it's impounded. And they go to pick up this vehicle, which they're still wondering where. They have been asking for the whereabouts of their grandchild. So this is July 15th. So they've been asking their daughter where their granddaughter is for a month.
Yep.
Keeps on giving them all these excuses. And then on July 15th, the unimaginable thing happens for these parents is that they go to pick up the Sunbird at the tow yard, and that is when they smell the worst smell they've ever smelled. What this smell becomes also a pivotal point in this case is that is when it all hits. So you got George, who's was a detective. He definitely knows the smell of a dead body. And then let's see the 911 call. You got that 911 call somewhere?
Yep.
So Cindy, I think my heart breaks the most for Cindy. But here's a 911 call.
Sam. I found out my granddaughter has been taken. She has been missing for a month. We're talking about a 3-year-old little girl. My daughter finally admitted that the baby's in the store. I need to find her. Your daughter admitted that the baby is where? The babysitter took her months ago. My daughter's been looking for her. I told you my daughter was missing for a month. I just found her today, but I can't find my granddaughter. She just admitted to me that she's been trying to find her herself. There's something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car.
Okay, what is the 3-year-old's name?
Kaylee. Caylee. Anthony.
Kaylee Anthony?
Yes.
How long has she been missing for?
I have not seen her since the 7th of June.
Is your daughter there?
Yes.
Can I speak with her?
She's downstairs. They want to talk to you. Answer the question.
She says I don't have anything to say.
She says, I don't have anything to say.
Can you tell me what's going on a little bit?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell me a little bit what's going on?
My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days.
And you know who has her?
I know who has her. I tried to contact her. I actually received a phone call today, now from a number that is no longer in service. I did get to speak to my daughter for about a minute.
Who has her? Do you have a name?
Her name is Zenaida Fernandez.
So that begins the string of lies that this woman, Casey Anthony, begins to tell about the disappearance of her daughter. So just listening to that reminds me so much of this case. It's nails on a chalkboard. It's so enraging to think about how annoyed she sounds. Like, leave me alone. I've got nothing else to say to them.
Bored and callous.
It's this woman is absolutely a sociopath, regardless of what anybody maybe believes took place, but definitely a sociopath. She doesn't have any emotions there. So she begins this series of lies. I saw some really good kind of taglines a lot back in the day where, when the truth lies, and it was just like, because there wasn't a single word out of Casey Anthony's mouth that was ever the truth. It's so pathological in everything that she says. So you listen to her mother, who's frantic because she knows now everything's coming to a head. She's just like, I'm smelling death in her car. My daughter's potentially is now saying she's missing. So I just wonder, I can't imagine what was going through Cindy Anthony's head at that time, because it is a rock and a hard place. And the judge who ends up overseeing this case, who's phenomenal, he says...
Second judge.
Yeah, the second judge, yeah. We'll talk about what happens with those judges, is that he does make a comment of it must have been difficult for this mother because she was holding so many keys at the time. Like, it's such a rock and a hard place to be trying to defend your daughter while you're also trying to find your granddaughter. So it's like every piece of evidence that you get, and she's in the middle of it all, it's like, how do you interpret it? Because so much of it meant that your daughter was involved. And so I actually believe, and we'll talk about when she takes the stand, is I actually believe that there were lies that Cindy told in order to protect her daughter.
And her husband.
Because if you think about what happens, this happens a lot, is that it's more common than you think when, like, a child kills a parent and the other parent has to testify. And it's like by the time they take the stand, they realize that I can't bring back my granddaughter. She can't come back. You know what I mean? And I'm not sure what took place, but I know I love my daughter. So it's like, do I also lose my daughter? Because the time that we'll talk about when she takes the stand, the murder trial against Casey Anthony had the potential of the death penalty. Mm-hmm. So she's sitting there thinking, so it's not uncommon when they take the stand for their stories to change. And I really do believe that it was a really hard part for Cindy, and she took the fall for a couple of things that she probably shouldn't have, because she was thinking, I don't want to lose another child, because that's really what would ultimately happen there. So we get these string of just lies. So I remember very clearly, because we're not far from Orlando, and I was in college when this was taking place, and I remember thinking, when all that was running on the news, it became very it became national news very quickly about what was taking place with this missing child. And and I remember everybody started like searching for her. And I remember thinking, like, I was like in the middle of, I think maybe even it was exams or something like that, but I remember thinking if I had time, I could go over there and I'd want to look too. Like, that's how much involved I remember. I remember thinking like I would go and search for her. And so the whole world is feeling connected to this little girl that's missing, wondering, wanting answers, why everybody's investigating it at the entire time, while Casey Anthony knows the truth. That she's already dead. She's already gone. Yet she's going to send everybody on this goose chase. So some of those goose chases that she sends kind of everybody on when she starts with her just string of lies is she starts by saying that, and I mean, this girl just lies with such vigor, such vigor. So she starts by saying that, she's been missing for 31 days. I gave her to... You say Zanny the nanny was the nickname that people were talking about. Zanny the nanny. And she says, I brought her to this apartment complex. And she's a person who will lie until you show her that she's lying, and then still acts like it wasn't necessarily a lie. It's that much. It's this confident lying. So she tells him that this nanny that she had been taking her to for a while lived at this apartment complex. They did a whole investigation, realized there's no woman that ever lived by there. She had never really been to this apartment complex, so the daughter was obviously not there. Another lie that she had said was that she had met this nanny through a mutual friend, and that ended up being a lie. And then one of the ones that always stuck in my head was she had told her parents that she was working for Universal Studios and that she had been working there for 4 years. 4 years she had been lying to her parents about working at Universal Studios. So she sat down, and when you watch these interview videos, it's disturbing how well she lies. It's disturbing how just overly confident she is about them. So she's just like, yeah, I work at Universal Studios and this is my job and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And the police department's like, all right, take us there. She takes them all the way to Universal. I remember all these things coming out. She takes them all the way to Universal Studios. She goes into the building, and then I think they said that she even walks past the front desk like she works there. Come to find out, she had done some contract work years before, but it didn't last very long. And so she literally takes them all through Universal Studios, the office, before she finally says, they're like, well, show us your office. And she's like, okay, I don't work here anymore. I was just too embarrassed to tell my family. After she has drugged the police department. So she has zero fear of anyone, especially the police. And so then the lies just continue to go. So she also lies, like she said on the 911 tape, that she had just talked to her that day. It's like, I had just heard from her on a phone that's now disconnected and da-da-da-da. And none of that was true. Absolutely none of it was true. So then what takes place is they've got this car that smells like death. They now realize that she's lying about this nanny. And so that leads the police department to arrest her on child neglect charges. Because they believe that obviously something's running afoul if your child's missing and now you've lied about where they were. So they use this as some kind of predicate to at least hold her temporarily. And that's not uncommon. They may not know exactly all of the things that they plan on charging her with, but at least if they can grasp onto something that puts her into their custody to where she's potentially not destroying evidence, not, hindering their investigation, which is obviously what she had been doing. They're now, you have search parties looking for a child that she knows is already deceased somewhere. So they hold her on child neglect to begin with, while they're still investigating to see if they can now charge her for additional things. So then they set her bond. I thought it was interesting was that she gets bonded out. It's a $500,000 bond, and a bondsman bails her out, and he makes a statement saying, I felt like if... The bounty hunter, right? Yeah. A bounty hunter, Leonard... Padilla. He says that he bonded her out in hopes of her being able to find Kaylee. That if he bonds her out, that maybe she'll take us to Kaylee's body. I remember there's people picketing outside of her house. I mean, the world was slowly turning
all the time
against her. And we were just talking about that this was, I remember, and MK was saying too, is we remember very clearly Nancy Grace. Nancy Grace was just, I mean, this was her prime case. I mean, I remember all of the headlines that rolled across, and Mary Catherine was saying, top mom kills child, top mom. I mean,
she just...
You talk about innocent until proven guilty. She had no idea. She was like, no, that's not how I work here. I'm going to tell you what I believe and what I think. And it became so just sensationalized that the whole world was watching, and everybody believed the same thing. They truly believed that this woman was responsible. So this entire time that they're doing an investigation while she was sitting in custody, now they've bonded her out. They find out that during these 31 days while her daughter was missing, she has been partying. She's been I think she was at downtown Disney, like living it up.
In a beauty contest.
She was in a hot body contest. She was in.
Got a tattoo.
She got a tattoo. I mean,
vida.
Yeah, life is beautiful, and I get it. People have different ways of grieving, but it's not reasonable to think that that's the way that the grieving would take place if your daughter had
she was
been
allegedly
died.
Looking for her.
Yeah, and she also is lying that she's saying that the entire time she's looking for her. So all of those things kind of cultivated together to where they've released her on those, but then she gets rearrested again. And when we brought back up the story, I forgot about her rearrest. So she gets rearrested. And this arrest was based on forgery and theft.
Checks.
So she was supposedly, she had taken checks from a friend and we're using them, and also theft. And so they rearrest her again. This woman is becoming...
She used those checks, basically, she said, to fund her activities during Kaylee's disappearance in July.
Oh,
she also stole her mother's credit card too.
Oh, sweet. This is just a sweet girl. She's a sweet girl.
Yeah.
So they arrest her again, and then they release her on bail again. So those charges were more minuscule, so she gets released again. A promissory note gets signed by her parents in order to bail her out. Then they're still doing their investigation. And so this is when they finally believe they've got enough to charge her. So they do a grand jury indictment. And we talked about before is that there's several different ways you can be charged with a crime. The police department can originally charge you with a crime, and then once it gets sent to the state attorneys they then file an information on it, which means the state attorneys is going, we agree with what the police department has charged you with, and therefore now we are officially making these official charges. So that's one way that it can be done. The police department can do, the state attorney's office can do it all by themselves. They can decide that they believe that they should charge you with the crime, and they can charge you with the crime. They don't even have to have a police officer and create the report. Then there's another way, which is the grand jury. And what that looks like, and the reason why there's usually a grand jury, and it's all by discretion. It doesn't have to be done all the time. It's done in federal courts and it's done in state courts. And that's literally where they bring in a jury, and they're a jury of your peers, and they put them on the stand, and they present a small version of the facts to the jury, and the jury has to decide, do they believe that there's enough there to proceed forward with making charges?
Is the jury smaller? Is it a smaller jury?
I think it's the same. No, I think it's the same. I think it's 6. I think they have to have 6 if it's not a crime that involves the death penalty, and I think it's 12. So we'll look at. I think that's exactly what it is. But it is interesting. So it's almost like a test run. It's like it allows the prosecution to go, how do we think a jury is going to gauge these facts? What are they going to think? And then it really kind of makes it more of a sound chargings. Like the charges that come out really are coming from a jury going, this is what we believe that there's enough evidence to support. So based on that, they arrest her again. And this is where they arrest her on first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and 4 counts of providing false information to police. At that point in time, she is arrested and is held with no bond.
And the forensic evidence from the car was disclosed. It indicated that a decomposing body had been present in the vehicle. So that basically...
That was really the nail in the coffin. Between the lies at that time, so between the lies and the fact that you have a child that is just still missing, and then you have the smell, the fact that they believe that they had enough evidence to show that there had been a decomposing body in the trunk of her car, based on their evidence, that was enough to have a grand jury. And so a grand jury is just coming back and going, there's enough to charge this person with them. The grand jury isn't coming back and saying that she's guilty of it. It's just saying that we believe there's enough to charge her with that. It's the only question for a grand jury at that point in time. So Casey Anthony, of course, pleads not guilty to them. I mean, what else would she say? She pleads not guilty. They do not give her bond or any type of bail due to the level of the charges.
Her parents bailed her out. Her parents bailed her out, and she was fitted with an electronic
No, that was
monitor.
before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
that was
right.
on just on her forgery and theft. But yeah, this time
she was incarcerated.
This time there isn't one at all. So a judge is the one who gets to decide that. A judge gets to decide if they believe, based on the severity of the charges, based on your history, based on the likelihood of you fleeing, if we believe that allowing you to be on bail, to be released from custody, is in the best interest of society. And the judge at the time believed that no, based on these facts, based on the fact that we still, and I think a lot of it had to come to the fact that it is important to the police department, karma, the world, the family, to find a body. And it is actually so important even to the police department. I think this is very respectful of the police department, is that there is a lot of times that they're willing to give somebody a very reduced sentence if they're willing to give up the location of a body, because we as a society have put a high value on being able to tangibly find that body. And so it's not just so the charges are more intense. It's because it's very beautiful to know, but it's because there's so much behind what a body symbolizes for somebody in grief or recovery or being able to heal, like closure. So there's a lot of times over history you'll hear that police officers and state attorneys are willing to really let people go a lot earlier as long as they're willing to tell us where the body is. And so finding that body to them was very important. So I believe one of the very big reasons why she didn't get any bail was because there still was not a body at that point in time. And I think they were afraid, and I think they knew very well, if they released her, that she would figure out, she'd go grab the body and then move it. And now that we know the body was found so close to the house, it's exactly what she would have probably did at that point in time, and made it to where it was incapable for anyone to find the body. So I think that was one of the, I believe that was a huge determining factor in why they didn't release her. I mean, yes, she's charged with first-degree murder, and they don't release her. They don't release most people on that anyways. But I definitely think that was a huge part of it, was the fact that there was still no body, and they were, feverishly looking for the body. So that is around October 28th, 2008. She is sitting in custody, no bail, and that is when the world gets to start seeing who this woman really is on these jailhouse tapes. Doing criminal defense, I tell my clients all the time, everything you say is being recorded. Everything you say is being recorded. Everything you say is being recorded. And you would be surprised on the type of tapes we will get as attorneys, because our clients literally forget that they're being recorded. They will say all kinds of just crazy stuff. But when you watch the tapes of Casey Anthony, which I remember watching them years ago. But now watching them again, preparing for this, it was again just, it's such an insult to injury to listen to her and the way she comes across on the videos. It didn't matter if the whole world was watching her or not. She didn't care. She was confidently like just enraged at the fact that she was there locked up and that she couldn't help in the investigation of her daughter. She couldn't help find her body. She wasn't getting any updates. And so watching and listening to those videos really gives you an idea now, once you find out, once her daughter's body's found, of just how psychotic the woman was. And I think at the time when we were watching the videos originally, we still didn't know that they were going to find her body, that it was going to be found, blocks from the house, and that eventually Casey Anthony would admit that her daughter had died drowning and that the body was hidden, and so that the fact that now you look back at those videos, it even gives you a whole nother perspective of them. But when we're watching them for the first time, not knowing all that, you still hate her because you're just like, how dare you? Everything you've said, everything that you've said so far is a lie. And all the videos you watch, her poor parents, it's just the attitude she takes and the way she treats them with such disrespect as they're just like tiptoeing around. The mother, Cindy, is always hysterical. I mean, she's always crying. Yeah. And that makes perfect sense. And what's so crazy is it always seems like Casey's like, Mom, get off the phone. I'm not gonna talk to you. Let me talk to Dad. If you can't stop asking me questions, if you can't stop crying, if you can't see that I'm the victim, like you're saying, if you can't see that I'm the victim here, I'm insulted that I'm here, sitting here. I can't even help in any of this. So they're trying to talk to her to get pieces. They're like, can we talk about this? Can we talk about that? She's like, insulted. I'm looking here. Is there anywhere else that you think that I should look? And she is literally like, stop asking me questions. I don't know anything. I gave you what I already knew so far, and I can't do anything else from behind bars. And then you see her parents, and they're wearing everyone's wearing those shirts with Casey's face on because they're adamantly looking for her. And so the whole world's watching these videos. The hate for her is still continuing to rise because you still see a lack of any type of empathy. And so we continue to watch kind of these videos that keep on coming through. And then that is when December 11th comes around and of 2008, where unfortunately Caylee Anthony's skeletal remains are found in a wooded area near the Anthony family home by Roy Kronk. So tell me about the Roy Kronk. So Roy Kronk ends up being an interesting piece of this because Roy Kronk is a meter reader, and he actually came forward in August of 2008. He said, which is what I think is weird about it is, he first calls the police and says, I see something suspicious in a wooded area near the Casey Anthony home. And then no one follows up on it. We always find out about this. There's always these 911 calls at the police department's like, oh, we'll just ignore that one.
The whole country's looking for it.
Yeah. Forget about that one. But I'm also just worried. I'm like, I wonder why, if he sees it and it's he thinks it's curious, why doesn't he go over there? Right. What is he doing? He's seeing it and he's going, making calls and being like, hey, on the side of the road, I think I see this. I think I see this, but not going and investigate. And I'm wondering if it's because some people just don't want to get involved.
Right.
Some people do not want to have to answer questions, to have to potentially be interrogated, not just answering questions, but interrogated of like, where were you at? What about this? It's just convenient you saw it there. And so you would normally have asked those questions of why he didn't come forward and actually do the investigation himself in August. And then you find out that whatever fear he probably had in August ended up being very real, because he then calls again, and because now he goes and actually looks for it. He goes back to it months later, so from August to December, this entire time, if someone would have listened in August of 2008 to Roy then, they would have found the body then.
And then they could have had so much more
They
evidence.
would have had so much more evidence. By then, you have this beautiful baby girl's body that has been thrown on the side of the road, and it has been decomposing for months. By the time December 11th rolls around and Roy goes back and goes, you know what? No one's listening to me. Now the whole world is looking for this little girl. I'm going to go back myself and I'm going to go and look. And that's where he notices a bag. And to physically look at it, because I remember when they started showing all the pictures, it's off the side of the road. There was like, it was just like a kind of a swampy area. So it's got some trees, it's got you know, a lot of leaves on the ground, but then also has a bunch of mud. There's been rain, and so it's definitely a muddy little, like kind of like murky, like swamp like little area on the side of the road, and not very far from the side of the road. And that is where her body's at. And hasn't even been buried. It's literally now it's under kind of some brushes and some mud and stuff, but it's not like deeply buried or any of that kind of things. So when they find the body, there were two plastic bags.
Skull.
Yeah, he thought he saw a human skull.
And he picked up a stick.
Yeah.
And he put it through the eye socket, and lifted it up.
He puts it through the eye socket and then he lifts it up. Oh my gosh, a baby skull.
And that's when,
a baby skull.
And the duct tape was still on the. And
So
then 3 other pieces elsewhere.
So then now we get a twist in the whole entire case, because now we actually have a body. The autopsy report from the Dr. G, she ends up going on and being famous after this. I guess she was pretty well known then, but then this is really kind of puts her on the map, and she has her own show. Most people have watched Dr. G. She's great to watch. But she says that there are 2 plastic garbage bags, a canvas laundry bag, and a baby blanket with the Winnie the Pooh print. A pair of partially decomposed multicolored shorts were among the clothes that were there. And this is what I think kind of shocked everyone, is there was duct tape found on the skull. And I think that was kind of pieces of where it was at, but from really kind of how they put it together is that it looked like there was duct tape that was on the mouth and the nose, but there were several pieces of duct tape, and the forensic kind of said that there was enough that could have potentially at one point in time covered the whole entire face.
Yeah, they said that probably wild animals had
pulled it apart. There was also a heart-shaped sticker. I remember that. There was a heart-shaped sticker that was on top of the duct tape that was over the mouth area. And then this body had been there for a very long time, decomposing. So then you have a change in the case. Now all of a sudden you've got a body, you have got a pathological liar who has been saying this entire time that her daughter was miles away with the babysitter and nobody can find her, and now she's found just a couple feet away. So they've already charged her with murder, so they've got nothing to change any of the charges at that point in time. And so she continues to maintain she's innocent. And then she gets represented by the defense attorney, Jose Baez. And I remember just thinking at this point in time that I knew at the time, I wasn't a lawyer yet, but I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And I understood to a degree that as a lawyer, our job is to uphold the Constitution and your right to a fair and impartial jury and your right to have, the burden upheld. And so it's not about so much if you're innocent or guilty. My job as a defense attorney is to uphold that standard. And I understood that concept. And when you're in law school, they talk to you about it a little bit more. And then when you practice criminal defense, it is something that criminal defense attorneys talk about a lot. But what you realize about criminal defense attorneys, if you're in that industry, is that there is a very big difference on how some of them practice. Like there are some attorneys who who do not care if you're innocent or guilty. They don't want to know. They're not going to ask. They'll tell you, don't tell me. My job is to defend you and advocate for you regardless of your innocence or guilt. That's my job. My job is to uphold those constitutional standards. And that's understandable. And honestly, the fact that the Constitution also says you have a right to defense, you have a right to an attorney if you can't afford it, is that we are built on the concept that even if you're guilty, you still deserve representation, right? To potentially mitigate your damages or to potentially make sure that the state is following the law and bringing charges that are backed by evidence. So there are those attorneys that are like, I don't want to know if you're innocent or guilty. And I always knew who I would be as an attorney. I felt like I did. I felt like I remember thinking I could never defend somebody who was guilty of a crime. And this is what I can tell you that I absolutely know now that I have been a criminal defense attorney, is that it really comes down to the facts of that case, depending on what you're doing. Because there are times that I have defended people who are potentially guilty of something, but not guilty of what they're being charged with. That there should be potentially that they've been guilty, but there's mitigating factors for why it took place, you know? So I've always knew that my morals had to come first. If I believed, and that's why I always made sure I was doing work that I got to choose. So I wasn't working for the state because I wasn't going to be giving cases I didn't feel comfortable about, or working for a public defender because I did not want to be in a position where I didn't morally feel that somebody deserved my advocacy for the stuff that they had done. But there are attorneys that are different, attorneys that don't feel that way. But I remember in this instance that what was so pivotal to me was not just the lying, it was the lack of any type of empathy or sympathy for anyone else during the time that this child was missing, and her family's looking, the world's looking. To me, I'm just like, there's a special place in hell for you that I don't believe you deserve anything. We're all here working for you while you know the truth and you're just lying about it. So Jose Baez, he jumps on, and I think I remember that there was a lot of conspiracy about how he gets involved, and because you're not supposed to solicit clients. Solicit as an attorney means we're not supposed to seek you out if we know that you need us. We're not supposed to go knocking on your door, ding, 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 when we see that you've been charged with a crime. Unless we're personal friends with you or connected some way, we've represented you before. But other than that, I think what we found out about Mr. Baez was that he did exactly that. I think what I remember, if I remember it correctly, was that he had went to the house after this whole story had gotten huge, and in an effort to represent them, and had made some agreement that he was going to do it for almost nothing as long as he had the rights to sell later on, and yada yada. And so based on those things, he ends up representing her, and he is at that point in time not really a well-known attorney at all. I think he had gotten in trouble with the bar for failure to pay his child support or something like that.
He was on the Simpson defense.
Oh.
O.J. Simpson. He was.
Before he was?
Yeah, he was. And Aaron Hernandez, too.
Yeah, well, I guess I didn't really know that at all.
Yeah.
I feel like he would be young for Jose. For O.J. Simpson. I feel like he'd be young.
I thought that I read that he was actually on that, but let me verify.
I feel like that would have been. No, it couldn't be, because I remember he had been practicing for very long. See, when he got barred.
I'm thinking of the forensic scientist.
Yeah, it's not Jose Baez, because he had not been practicing. I think he had only been barred for not very long when he represented her case.
Yeah, you're right. It said he recalled being in law school and ducked out of class to watch the O.J. Simpson's murder trial. And Johnny Cochran became one of his heroes. He said, I wish I could win this case, and I could win several more, and I still couldn't accomplish what Johnny did in his time practicing law.
So that would make sense to why he would show up to her house when this became when this became such a huge deal. So she ends up getting a couple of attorneys. She ends up also having an attorney whose specific role was a death penalty attorney. So the way that it works in Florida is that if you have been charged with something like first-degree murder and it's decided that the prosecution will seek the death penalty, they don't have to. They get to make that decision based on the facts of the case. And so in this case, because they believe it was so severe, they were seeking the death penalty. And in that instance, you have to have an attorney who represents you who is technically death penalty certified. So which means they have usually they have to have been a part of several death penalties, like requirements for it. You can't just be represented by any attorney.
Is the burden of proof different for a death penalty?
Nope.
It isn't.
The burden is the same.
Okay.
Yep. So she had one attorney specifically whose job was to make sure that she was representing the fact that she had the credentials, that she was an attorney who was able to represent somebody who is death penalty certified and qualified, I think is the actual word. And so she was part of their team, and her job was to watch the case, because she wasn't really vocal like Jose was, but to watch the case and be part of the team and be prepared that if she was found guilty, you would go to the sentencing stage, which is huge, the sentencing stage. And at that point, there is even times where that's so big, you bring in different lawyers to represent you only during sentencing. And their job is, there are attorneys who specialize in the mitigating factors only for once you're found guilty of first-degree murder, and then you go to the sentencing phase in order to determine if it's going to be life in prison or the death penalty. And there are attorneys who find it to be the most just rewarding. I remember when I first became an attorney and realized that there were attorneys who specialized in it, and I know some of them, they find it extremely rewarding because their only job is to make sure you don't get the death penalty. You've already been found guilty. Their job is to just save your life, and to just get you life in prison. So that was one of the attorneys that she had part of her team. So they start preparing their defense while the world is already decided the outcome of this trial. They already believe she is 100% guilty. And so we'll get right into the trial, because I remember just the whole world's watching this trial kind of take place and start. And one of the very first things that takes place is motion for change of venue. We've talked about this before, is that when you have a case that is so just backed by the public and like social media, anything on the world news, if everybody's talking about it, especially in that city, it becomes questionable if you're going to get your right to a fair and impartial jury. So that's the very first thing we do in a trial, is making sure that the jury that we pick for you is going to follow the law and is going to be impartial. And one of the main elements of that is that we try to make it to where the jury that we pick does not have already knowledge of the case from the outside world, right? We've talked about this before, is that we want to make sure that the most of the evidence they're getting is for the first time during trial from the attorneys that is in accordance with the rules of evidence. Because remember, only certain things come into trial. So you will have heard all kinds of crazy things on Nancy Grace. Nancy Grace will give you every piece of evidence that anyone has called in, said, wrote her some crazy email. She will be running that story for the headlines, and her opinions. But if that's what you listen to, then there's a real high chance that you will be prejudicial when you come to be a jury, because you will now have all this knowledge you got from all these different places, and we don't want that. We want you coming in as a fresh slate, and the only information you're getting is from the attorneys that has been filtered through the rules of evidence, because not everything is allowed to come in. And so that was a very big deal at the beginning of this case, because at that point in time, you couldn't bump into somebody in Orlando that didn't know this case, but you really couldn't go very much anywhere. And I felt in the United States, because it was so huge. Everybody was just questioning, where is this girl? And then where is this baby? And then when you find out where the baby's at, and then you're like, is this mother is still lying? She's sitting here like just with this indignant, this like just her attitude about the entire thing, and she's still going that. The whole world's watching. The whole world was so interested in this case and wanting to know what happened and why would she do it, and what's her defense going to be, considering she's already been caught in so many lies so far. So they motion for a change of venue, and what ends up taking place, which was interesting, is that they decide that what they'll do is they'll have the trial in Orlando, but they will come to our little neck of the woods. They come right here to my backyard in Pinellas County, Clearwater, Florida, and they decide to do the jury selection here. And then the plan is to take all those juries members, bring them to Orlando, and sequester them all there in Orlando. So that means they're providing them housing, shuttles, food, all of those things during the ended up being 33 days, give or take, trial that ends up taking place. So that's very interesting, is they thought that, hey, maybe if we skip across the pond, let's go an hour and a half down the street, then we will definitely be able to, we're going to find people who don't know anything about this case. Not true at all. Because
we were all watching it.
Yeah, everybody has been watching. So it didn't make all that much of a difference. But okay, so that is some of the big things that takes place. And then immediately after, the other thing that happens is that the judge, the prior judge, which is Judge Strickland.
Stan Strickland.
Yeah, Stan Strickland.
Cool name.
Yes, cool name. Cool judge. He ends up, there's a motion to recuse him because of the statements he makes to a blogger. So you can move for a recusal of a judge if you believe that a judge is not going to give you a fair trial for certain things. It sometimes comes from statements they make. That's why judges don't make any statements anymore. They're not supposed to be. Not supposed to talk to at the end of a trial is one thing, but before a trial, during a trial, they're not supposed to make statements to anyone. No news, no nothing, no people on the golf course, like absolutely nothing. I'm supposed to talk to anybody about the case. And then they're supposed to always be fair and impartial, just like a jury. And so you can file a motion as an attorney to recuse a judge. It's not something that I would ever suggest unless you had overwhelming evidence, because let me tell you, most of the people I know who've ever motioned to recuse a judge, which means you're literally alleging that that judge is not doing their job and cannot do their job for this case, and therefore I'm tattletaling on them, and they should be removed. They should be recused. A chief judge should come in and go, no, you gotta go. Most of the attorneys I've ever seen file that motion, it's been denied, and then they still have to be in front of the judge. So it's a motion we take very, very, very seriously. So we are running out of time today, but we have so much more to get into, the nitty gritty, the facts of the case, the elements of the trial, and why did it happen that the world knew that Casey Anthony was guilty, yet a jury came back and found her not guilty of first-degree murder, and nobody is found guilty of the murder of a child who's found on the side of the road, wrapped in duct tape, wrapped in plastic bags with a heart over her mouth and decomposing there for months, is probably one of the most traumatizing things I think I've heard in a while. I mean, like I remember I was young, understanding what has happened to the justice system. So stay with us, follow us, like us, listen to us next week. Subscribe, all those great words. And we will catch you next time on Legal Candy. Thank you.
Thank you.